grab the study guide on your way in. Heroes and Grasshoppers Part 2. We did Part 1 a few weeks back. It's on the church website. It's in the CD. You grab the CD in the media room if you'd like to get caught up. If you missed it, that's okay. We will give you a brief summary. But I love studying these guys. I love studying Joshua and Caleb and Moses and Aaron. Men in way over their heads, yet they're going for it. They're walking by faith, and God is doing wonderful things in and through them. And so some context here before we get into our passage. Moses had led the nation of Israel out of Egypt. They had been there slaves for over 400 years. God did the miracles, you may remember, the 9 plagues, and then the 10th as the Passover there in Egypt, and Pharaoh finally let them go, only to change his mind and send the army after them. And there the nation of Israel was stuck between the Red Sea and the armies of Egypt coming towards them. And God parted the sea, and they crossed on dry land. God promised to give them the land of Canaan. So Moses sent 12 spies in. Remember, 10 of them came back saying, we can't do this. Those people are too strong. There are too many. Their cities are fortified with big walls. We cannot do this. Why are we here? Why did we ever leave Egypt? Can't we just go back? What are we doing here? Oh, that we would have died in the wilderness. Oh, that we would have died in Egypt. But 2 returned with great excitement, Caleb and Joshua. They had faith in their heart. They had hope in their heart. All the 10 that came with the negative report, they said at the end of our passage a few weeks ago, we looked as grasshoppers in our own eyes, and our enemies will see us the same way. They saw themselves as grasshoppers, meaning small insects going up against large enemies. So that's where we get the grasshoppers from. And so let's go ahead and read Numbers chapter 14, verses 1 through 4 together. That night, the members of the community raised their voices and they wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to the land only to let us die by the sword? Our wives and our children, they will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us just to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So let's take a look at the traits of the grasshopper. And as we do, let's ask ourselves, do I see any of these traits in my heart, in my attitude, in my thinking? Because we don't want to be like them. We want to be like Caleb and Joshua, Aaron and Moses. We want to be heroes. We want to be leaders to our family. We want to lead our people in faith to the best that God has for us. Some of the grasshopper traits. Number 1, grasshoppers give up. They give up quickly. These guys quit before the fight had even started. They just peeked into the land, and already they were willing to quit. They quit before the fight. Loud weeping, shrieking, crying. In ancient cultures, this was to display mourning, usually at the death of a loved one. This is how you would behave when someone you loved died. This is signs of mourning that we're seeing. They're already mourning their deaths and the deaths of those around them, and they haven't even picked up a sword or a rock. They haven't even had an arrow fly by their head. Nothing has gone wrong up to this point. You could argue that everything has gone right. The plagues in Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, the provisions in the wilderness, and now God said, go look at the land. I'm giving it to you. And we studied a few weeks ago, they went and they looked at the land, but they also looked at the enemies, the men, the warriors, the walls, the terrain, all the problems, and they saw all the things that could go wrong. And now they're coming back, and they've already quit, and the battle has not even started yet. They had not even engaged the enemy. They were already acting as though they had been slaughtered. Are we quick to give up? When we face a daunting task, when we face something that we're intimidated by, isn't the temptation to say, oh, I couldn't do that, I could never do that, and then we just turn and go back the way we came? Rather than stand in faith, we give up when we're intimidated. That's the trait of a grasshopper. If there's something in your life right now, or you know that's a tendency that you have, I would encourage you this morning to make the determination to be strong in the Lord and say, you know what, from this day forward, I'm not going to be quick to give up. When I'm intimidated or overwhelmed by a task or something that's before me, I'm not going to be like the grasshopper. I'm going to behave heroically, as we see in the lives of Joshua and Caleb. Let us be people who never give up, especially without even trying. Number one, I want us to see that God is greater. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4. See that God is greater. You, dear children, you are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. Yes, they were outnumbered. Yes, they were up against fortified cities, all the different things they could look at that were to their disadvantage. But the one thing they had to their advantage was far greater. And what was that? That was the promise of God. That was the Lord God Almighty on their side. See that God is greater. Secondly, seek God and be fear-free. Psalm 34:4 is a wonderful passage. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all of my fears. What is it that so often holds us back or brings us to a place of defeat? Most of the time, it's not the battle. It's the fear of the battle. It's this intangible fear. You can't grab it. You can't hold it. You can't throw it. It's just a thought. It's a feeling. It's an emotion of fear. And people give up, and they don't want to fight the fight because of fear. And he says, he delivered me when I sought him, and he delivered me from all of my fear. So seek God, and what will happen? We'll be delivered from our fear. Spend that morning pressing into his presence, realizing that God in you is greater than whatever you're going to face in the world, and allow the presence of God to drive out all fear. Next, walk with God through your fight. Walk with God through your fight. We don't see promises in the Bible of God taking you and letting you avoid all trouble. What do we see over and over again? Through examples and through teachings, God walks with you through the battle. Do we have to go through it? Yes. He didn't make Daniel not go in the lion's den, right? Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they did go through the furnace, right? These things happen. We go through the trial, but Psalm 23:4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he's still going through it. I will not fear, for you are with me. He says, I fear no evil. Fear is oftentimes the culprit rather than defeat or the battle itself. Mark 11:23, truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and he does not doubt in his heart, but he believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. It doesn't matter what odds you are up against, whatever fight you are in the middle of, there's no problem that is too big for God. Simply have faith. Stay in that fight. Grasshoppers give up, but heroes, they stay in the fight. They say, I won't give up. So first of all, grasshoppers are quick to give up. Secondly, grasshoppers grumble, don't they? We see them grumbling and complaining. Verse 2, all the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. What are they doing there? They're blaming others for their own fears. Moses and Aaron had been nothing but good to them. Yet their fear was causing turmoil in their hearts, and rather than looking inward and saying, this fear is my issue, it's my problem, and I need to deal with it or get some help with it, instead of doing that, they look outwardly and attack others. Grasshoppers blame others for their own shortcomings. They complained against Moses, the man who was heroically used by God to set them free. Miracle after miracle done through the hands of Moses and the hands of Aaron, but all of a sudden it's all their fault now. The fear that's in their heart is now being projected and blamed on Aaron and Moses, instead of standing in faith or acknowledging that they have a weakness. They choose to blame others. It's okay to have a weakness. It's okay to feel weak or shaken by a daunting task or situation. That's all right if we can acknowledge that that weakness is in ourselves and not blame someone else for it, right? We can't control feeling overwhelmed at times. You can't always control your emotions, but we can have a mind of wisdom about us. We can have a humble heart about us that says, you know what? I feel weak in this area. I am afraid of this task. And go to a brother or a sister in the Lord. Go to a husband or a wife or a close friend or a pastor and say, you know, I know the Word of God says this. I know God has promised that. But here I am today, and I feel afraid. I feel weak. I feel anxious. Help me through this. And as we acknowledge our weakness, God will become strong in and through us. Amen? People often choose to dump their anger or their fear or their insecurities onto the easiest target. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and said, what was that about? How did they possibly get so upset at me? Well, there's something else going on in their life. Something else causing anxiety and turmoil, and you were the easiest one to dump it all on, and you may have had nothing to do with it. Let us not be the ones who do that, who take our fear and insecurity and then go blame others for the situation that we're in. It's a terrible habit if we're the parents of children, because oftentimes the children are the ones that are the easiest to blame. You have issues at work, you have issues in relationships, you're tired, you're overwhelmed, there's a task at work that's just got you down or frustrated, you feel in over your head, and then your kid leaves their shoes out, and you rail on them for it. You're dumping your frustration in the easiest place. Let us be aware of that and not do those things, but rather go to the husband or wife and just say, I just feel in over my head. Help me through this. Go to the Lord in prayer and say, God, I feel this anxiety. I feel this fear. I feel this stress. I know it's not of you. Help me through this. Mark chapter 9, the story of a man who comes to Jesus, and he says, my boy has these fits, and he throws himself in the fire, and there's demonic activity going on. And Jesus said to him, if you believe, he'll be healed. And what did the man say? He acknowledged his weakness, didn't he? He said, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. He was struggling with faith, wasn't he? But rather than blame or rather than make an excuse, he simply was honest about it. He said, yes, I believe, but help that part of me that is struggling to believe. And did he receive the miracle? He did. Jesus honored that. 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your, what did he say? Weakness. Is it okay to have a weakness? We can't always control where we are weak, but we can acknowledge it. We can place it in God's hands. We can say, Lord, strengthen this part of my life. He says, therefore, I will boast more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest in me. His power comes through where we are weak, because where we are weak, we realize we need to depend on God. And so if we acknowledge those points that are weak, if we acknowledge those fears and anxieties, and we go to God rather than make excuses or put up walls so that others don't see those things, if we are honest before God and before people in our lives, He will even work in our weakness. Grasshoppers also say this phrase a lot. If only. That phrase jumped out of the Bible at me. If only. That implies that things would be fine if only it weren't for this one problem. And this one problem is almost always someone else's fault. If only they, if only that, if only this. And it's out of the hands of the individual who is complaining about it. If we catch ourselves even saying in our heart and minds, oh, life would be good, everything would be so great, if only, stop yourself and say, hey, wait, that's the attitude of a grasshopper. A grasshopper says, if only the world were a little bit different, if only this, if only that. They say, if only we had died in Egypt. The things in Egypt were bad, but at least they were predictable, right? There was no future in Egypt, only poverty. Only death was there for them in Egypt, and they were not expected to have any type of ambition. They were not expected to hope for anything better. Nothing great was expected of them, and I think they found comfort in that. Even though there was no future, they said, if only we hadn't left Egypt. Egypt is often seen as a picture of being stuck as a slave in sin, isn't it? Often the Bible refers to Egypt and slavery as a part of our sinful life, as modern Americans, post-Christ Americans, Christians, as Christians, we see Egypt as a picture of slavery to sin, and that promised land is a picture of the kingdom of God, and the wilderness is the journey in between, the journey of life. Change can definitely be challenging. There's so much better ahead, but the temptation is to look back and only remember the comfort and forget the horror that was in the past. If only we could go back to Egypt. If only we had died in the wilderness. They would rather, think about this, they would rather be dead than afraid, right? If only we had died in the wilderness. Well, there's nothing for you in the wilderness. The promised land is there, and God told you you can have it. What's the problem here? The problem is fear. They would rather be dead than be afraid. You know, a few years ago, I don't know if it still is, the number one fear in America is what? You remember? Public speaking. That's the number one fear. What was number two? Death. People said number one, public speaking. The second most popular answer was, I'm afraid of dying. So that means most people would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy, right? Fear doesn't always make sense, right? They would rather be dead than be afraid. That was their only issue at the time. All their other needs were being met. God was promising them good things. Their leaders were promising them good things, that God is going to take us into that land, but they were afraid. And they said, if only we had stayed in Egypt, if only we had died in the wilderness. In Egypt, all they wanted was freedom, and now that they have freedom, they're being devoured by their own fear. They would feel that if they went back to Egypt, they would be safe. That was their feeling. But we know in Egypt they were being abused, they were being starved. There was a period where they were killing all their male babies. It was a terrible place to live. It was a terrible place for children. There was nothing good and no future there. But now that they're scared, they say, well, let's go back to what we know. If only God had never saved us. If only we had died in Egypt. If only we had died in the wilderness. But we know, we believe that our lives are guided by the sovereign hand of God. Do you believe that? That your life is guided by the sovereign hand of God? That as you walk with Jesus, that he's going to accomplish his will in your life? God directed each step of the Exodus. That is definitely clear based on the supernatural events that took place from the 400 years in Egypt to the plagues, to the Passover, to the parting of the Red Sea. He was bringing them into the promised land, and it could not have been any clearer that God was going to accomplish this, and there was no stopping God. It was just a matter of who was going to get in. The cruise ship is getting to the destination. Who's jumping overboard before it gets there? That's the question. God was going to bring the people into the land. God is directing your life. He's directing my life. Let there be no if only this would happen, or if only that can happen. Let us simply trust God and face each and every challenge. Amen? Amen. If you are walking with God, let there be no if-onlys. Let us turn those if-onlys into if God be for me, right? If only this, hey, if God be for me, he's going to take care of that. Oh, if only that. Well, hey, if God is for me, he is going to take care of that as well. Let us get rid of all the if-onlys in our life and replace them with if God be for me. And we will see that we will become those heroic men and women of faith that we so desire to be. Thirdly, we see that grasshoppers are gloomy. If you're following the outline, I believe it's capital letter C. Grasshoppers are gloomy. Why is God, verse 3, bringing us into this land only to let us fall by the sword? Well, who gave them that idea? Did God ever say that? Did Moses ever say that? That's just their own attitude. That's their own heart. Why did he bring us here only to have us die by the sword? How about this next one? Our wives and our children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? Grasshoppers have that gloomy perspective of the future. Ask yourself, do I see good things ahead? The blessings, promises, and victories that I have in Christ ahead? Or am I looking at all the bad things that could maybe, possibly, but probably won't happen, right? Look at the language he used. Our children will be taken as plunder. They're considering it already done. But grasshoppers, they question God's plans and God's motives. He said he is bringing them into blessing. They say, why is he bringing us here to die? Sometimes people say, how could God let this happen? Or they give God ultimatums. God, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do that. But God is working on a different level, isn't he? God sees from the perspective of eternity, where all the wrongs have been made right, where pain is gone, loneliness is gone, grief and heartache are healed, vengeance has been completed on evildoers, and he knows that for all of eternity, children who died tragically will be joyfully abounding forever, that all the wrongs will be made right. We see in Revelation chapter 21, verses 3 through 4, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eye. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no crying or pain. The former things have passed away. That's the perspective that God is looking from. We shouldn't be those who question his plans and his motives. We may lose our way in times of fear and in times of pain, but let us never question God's plans and God's motives. We look at Israel and we say, how could they possibly have doubted, don't we? We say, how could you doubt after all that God had done? But you know what? Someone looking back on your life and my life might say, look at how good you had it. How could you ever have doubted? Look at how comfortable you were. Look at all the things God provided. Look at the life that God has given you in this wonderful land. How could you doubt the faithfulness of God? So let us remember this lesson and not doubt, but rather let faith prevail. We see here in this gloomy perspective that grasshoppers also assume the very worst. Where did their minds go? To the very worst place. Our children and our wives will be taken. They didn't say might be taken or could be taken. They went to the worst possible place in their mind, the worst possible outcome, and they decided that's what is going to happen. That's what grasshoppers do. And I don't know about you, but I have to fight that temptation as well. If I commit to this, if I take this direction, if I choose this, what is the worst possible thing that could happen, and am I willing to go that direction? Rather than flipping it around and saying, what's the best that God could do in and through this situation? God could do something awesome. And if this decision does not violate his word, and better yet, if this decision is in line with God's word, I'm not going to worry about the worst that could happen. I'm going to believe God for the best that could happen. But they're talking about this worst case scenario as if it were a certainty. They will be taken as captives. Fear has brought them to the darkest place in their minds. Don't dwell on those worst possible scenarios. It's all right to be aware of them. It's wise to be aware of them. But it's better to turn it around and say, what if God brings the victory? What if we become rich? What if we have peace? What if we are healed? Well, let's go for it. And let's put it in God's hands and see what the Lord will do. Don't dwell on the worst. Believe God for the very best. Ask yourself, has God said it? Well, then believe it and go forward. That should be an encouraging word to us this morning. And lastly, about grasshoppers, and we'll look at some traits of our heroes. Grasshoppers, they always want to go backwards. They don't want to go forwards. They want to go backwards. They want to go back to what they knew. Chapter 14, verse 4. Wouldn't it be better if we went back to Egypt? They said, let us choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. Think about this. Who were they thinking about when they made that statement? Were they thinking about themselves? Were they thinking about their children and their grandchildren? Who were they thinking about? Let us go back to Egypt. He said, let us go back to Egypt. They're thinking about themselves. There was no good future for their kids, no good future for their grandkids there, yet they still wanted to go back. They think of themselves first. Wouldn't it be better for us, talking about their generation? They were not considering the future of their children and the future of their grandchildren. They were willing to sacrifice their family's future and all the good their families could have in order to get out of a moment that was filled with fear. I don't know about you, but I'd like to think that we're willing to give our lives, to give everything we have, to give our children something better, to give our grandchildren something better. But they weren't willing to do that. They wanted to preserve their own lives. Wouldn't it be better for us if we go back? But heroes walk by faith through their fears. They bring their children and grandchildren into a better future, a better perspective than they had when they were young. Grasshoppers want to run back to that old lifestyle rather than go for the prize, the land that God had promised. They want to go back to their old ways, their old slavery. And it's tempting to go back to what you know. even if it's a bad place, because faith requires us to venture out into the unknown and trust that God will bring the blessing, trust that God will bring the victory, and trust and faith are both a part of going for things that you don't yet see. You can't touch them, you can't feel them, you can't see them yet, but you're trusting that God will bring them about. And the temptation is to always go back to that dark corner where at least life was predictable. But don't go back. Stay the course. Grasshoppers, they don't value loyalty and honor very much, do they? They should have been willing to lay their lives down for Moses. If someone is critical of Moses, they should have stepped up and said, hey, look at what this guy has done for us. They should be willing to put themselves on the line to defend those leaders if they were loyal and if they had honor in their hearts. But they threw all that to the wind because of their fear. They had no loyalty. They had no honor. They wanted to replace Moses after all that he had done for them. He put his own life on the line to stand before Pharaoh day in and day out for them, for their sake. Moses was a free man before all this. He was out in Midian. He had his own family. He had his own thing going on. He wasn't in Egypt. He wasn't a slave. And he came back to deliver them, to be obedient to the word of God. Yet there was no loyalty. There was no honor. They just said, replace him, and let's go back. No matter who it hurts, no matter what it costs. Let's take a look at some of the traits of the hero. As we covered those kind of doom and gloom traits of the grasshopper, are kind of hard to get through, especially if some of those were striking a chord in your heart saying, you know what, I am kind of like that. Yeah, I find myself with that type of attitude. Yeah, I do let fear. If only I do. Maybe some of those things were hitting you kind of hard. Be encouraged today. You're in the right place today. You still got a lot of living left to do, a lot of people to influence, many victories to attain as you walk with Jesus through the rest of your life. Make that turnaround here this morning. But traits of the hero, verses 5 through 10. Then Moses and Aaron, they fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly that was gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, who were there among those who had explored the land, they tore their clothes and said to the Israelite assembly, the land that we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, to a land that is flowing with milk and honey. He will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, and the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. So God put a stop to all that, didn't he? The glory of the Lord was shining on the tent of meeting, and everyone had to stop. Well, let's take a look at this. Number one, heroes stay humble. Moses and Aaron, in verse 5 and 6, they fell face down before the assembly of Israel. Caleb and Joshua, they tore their clothes. Let's look at these things. Moses and Aaron falling on their faces, an act of great humility. They didn't display pride. They didn't lord their power over the people as they could have. Rather, they showed humility and servanthood. Heroes stay humble in the sight of God as well as in the sight of man. They fell face down in front of the whole assembly. They threw their dignity to the wind, and they called out immediately to God. 1 Peter 5, verse 6, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, and he will lift you up in due time. What a great example of that New Testament passage we see here in the life of Moses. He fell face down, he and Aaron, and they started praying and calling out to God. Their first response to all of this criticism was not to fight back. What was it? It was to go to the Lord in prayer. They didn't immediately start saying, who brought you out of Egypt? Who parted the Red Sea? Who called down the plagues? Who's been providing for you? All you whiners and complainers, you should be grateful. They didn't say any of that, did they? They humbled themselves before God. They humbled themselves before the very people who were accusing them, and they went to the Lord in prayer. A lot of wisdom there. You want to be seen as a hero? Don't throw stones back in a foolish argument. It was obvious God was bringing them to this land. Look at all that he had accomplished. And if you're walking with Jesus, you should say, it's obvious that God is with me. I'm not going to throw foolish stones. When I'm criticized, I'm going to go to the Lord in prayer. They fell face down. Philippians 4:6, don't be anxious for anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Trust that God can use even bad circumstances, even unfair treatment for good. Who's the perfect example of that? I mean, Jesus, but secondarily, Joseph in the Old Testament, right? Rejected by his brothers, sold into slavery, lied about as a slave, thrown into prison, forgotten in the prison, and then he rises to be the most powerful man in the world, saves the world from starvation, and what did he say at the end of the book of Genesis? You, my brothers, you meant this for evil against me, but God has used it for good to save so many lives. Moses and Aaron are in that type of situation. This is not fair. This is not right. But hey, I'm going to trust that God will take a bad, unfair situation and bring about his glory. We need to trust God. That's what heroes do. Joshua and Caleb, they tore their clothes. This is a sign of grief at an offense to God. They knew that God was offended by these actions. They foresaw the coming judgment of God, and they tore their clothes as an act of humility, as an act of acknowledgement of sin before God, to say, God, I acknowledge the sin of my people. Have mercy on us. That's why they tore their clothes. This was done as an attempt to mediate between a sinful people and an angry God. They're seeing this and saying, God is probably getting angry at this. God, forgive us. And they rip their clothes. Have mercy on us. This is not right. It was an acknowledgement of the sin of the people. And you know what? Heroes want to see people forgiven, right? Heroes don't want to see vengeance brought on people. We want to see them forgiven. We want to see their lives turn around. We want to see them march into the promised land side by side along with us. They could have stepped aside and said, God, deal with them. Crush them. We'll go in without them. But they tore their clothes. Humility, love, forgiveness. Those are the attributes of a hero. While the congregation was talking about killing Moses, how ironic was it that Moses was praying that God would not kill the people? As you read on in this narrative, you see God says, I'll wipe them out, and I'll start a new nation with you. And Moses says, don't wipe them out. Don't wipe them out. What type of testimony would that be among the people? Don't wipe them out. And then God gives him that request. God says in verse 20, I believe, I have forgiven them as you have asked. They're wanting to kill Moses while Moses is saving them. That's a heroic act. How does that apply to your life? I don't know. What situations are you in? What relationships are you in where people are after you and accusing you and nagging you? Maybe they're blaming you for their shortcomings. Are you heroic enough to say, you know what? I'm not going to throw stones back. I'm going to fall on my face in prayer. I'm going to ask that God change their heart. I'm going to ask that they turn it around and they march into the promised land alongside me. Luke 6:28, bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. That's what true heroes do. It takes a lot of inner strength. It takes a lot of the grace of God. Heroes stay humble before God and man. Heroes intercede and pray for their people. They pray for the salvations of the very ones trying to stone them. All these attributes and actions only come from a humble heart. So heroes, we have to stay humble. Secondly, I think I only have 3 here. We'll find out, won't we? Heroes, they speak hope and they speak truth. That's number 2. Verses 7 through 9. Joshua stood up, he said, the land we explored is so good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into a land that is flowing with milk and honey. He will give it to us. Only don't be rebellious against the Lord. Do not be afraid of the people of the land. We will devour them. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. Joshua was speaking hope and he was speaking truth. But first of all, as heroes, we need to be willing to speak up. We need to communicate the truth. We must recognize our time to speak and speak the truth of God into that situation. The temptation is to stay silent when there's controversy. But if you know the truth, speak that truth and fill it with hope. What was the hope? The hope was a future, a bright future, the promised land. He says it's exceedingly good. We saw how good life can be. A land flowing with milk and honey. It is to be given to us. Let us go take it. There's a lot of hope and inspiration in those words. We have that bright future in Christ, don't we? There may be challenges and there will be hardships. But we know as followers of Jesus, he is bringing us into glory, isn't he? So speak that hope when people need to hear it. It's a little harder to speak the truth sometimes, though, isn't it? What did he say? He said we need to be pleasing to God. That's the first thing he said. If God is pleased with us, that's what he said. We need to be pleasing to God, and nothing has changed about that. We can't call on God to bless us when we're living in sin. God won't bless our sin. If our life is out of line, let us ask forgiveness and make those changes. Can a drug dealer get down on his knees before the Lord and say, Lord, bless today's sales? Is God going to honor that request? God, bring in the money today. I need to feed my family. Help me sell this dope. Let me get rid of all of it today. Help me evade the police today. Is God going to honor that request? Not likely, right? What if we're living in sin with a guy or gal, or we're living together, we're not married and all that? We say, God, bless this, bless that. We need to live a life that's pleasing to God. Live a life that's pleasing to God. That's the truth that he spoke. Romans 12:1, therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercy of God, present yourself as a living sacrifice acceptable to God. There's a few other passages there I'd encourage you to read on your own. But if we are pleasing to God, he will give us that land. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. All these other things, they'll be added unto you. Put God first. Live a life that's pleasing to God. That's the truth. Secondly, he says, don't be rebellious. The Hebrew word there is marad, and it means bold and audacious in rebellion. If we know what is right, we ought to do it. This word, rebel, don't be rebellious, is not necessarily talking about slipping or stumbling or having an occasional moment of weakness. That's not what he's talking about. What he's saying is an audacious and bold life that is in rebellion to the ways of God. Choosing a lifestyle, choosing a way to live that is defiant to the word of God. Hebrews 3:15 speaks about this very occasion in the wilderness from the New Testament perspective. He says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart as you did in the days of rebellion. Those days of rebellion are the days we're talking about now in our passage. So he says, first of all, live a life that is pleasing to God. Second of all, don't be rebellious to the ways of God. And the third truth is, do not, and we've talked about this a lot already, be afraid of the people. Don't be afraid of the enemy. Don't be afraid of the obstacle that lies ahead of you. I love what Joshua says. He says, we will devour them. Wow, he's really going for it. Don't be afraid of them. We're going to go devour them. I recently got to coach my 10-year-old daughter's basketball team. It was a lot of fun, 9 and 10-year-old league, and we're going to follow all the rules. They have substitution rules. Every child must play equally. And I noticed the other teams weren't abiding by that rule. They were playing their superstars the whole game, and it came down, we won all of our games, and it came down to us and another team that had won all their games except the games against us. And the game was coming right down to the wire, and they had the best kid in the league, the best player in the league, and they hadn't taken him out of the game. He's only supposed to play half the game. And it's going to the last 4 minutes, and we're waiting to see if they put him in the game for the last 4 minutes, and I knew that they would, because if they hadn't abided by the rules now, they're not going to abide by the rules in the end. And our team, I told them from day one, we're going to abide by the rules. I don't want to hear any curse words. We're going to have the best attitude out there, win or lose. It just so happened we won everything. But anyway, I got the trophy to prove it. So they were putting their superstar in for the last 4 minutes. The head of the league is sitting at the scoring table. He says, man, they're really cheating you on the substitutions, aren't they? It's a 2-point game. We're only winning by 2 going in the last 4 minutes. And I said, that's all right. Let them cheat. We'll beat them anyway. Just devour them. 9 and 10-year-old league. Coaching this team to the top. Got the trophy to prove it. And even the kids that came into the huddle say, they're not taking their guy out. I said, it's all right. Go beat them anyway. Show them how it's done. And we do I always say, who wants it more? They say, we do. Who wants it more? We do. See ball, get ball, see ball, get ball. And they get all hyped up. And then they run out there, 9 and 10-year-old little boys and girls. And we ended up beating them. But it was cool in that moment. I actually didn't know if we were going to win or not. When he said, they're cheating on the substitutions, I said, it's all right, let them. We'll beat them anyway. And I hope we beat them now that I said that. Oh, man. That was a whole lot of fun. But that attitude to say, we're going to live right and we're going to win, right? We're going to go into that land. We're going to devour them. Let us have that bold and audacious attitude for the things of God. This is not a compromise with the enemy. Our life should not be a trade-off with the enemy. It should be an attitude of complete and utter victory. Don't settle for just a better situation. Say, God, I want everything that you have. He went on to say, their protection is gone. And that kind of points at this thought that God had allowed them to exist for this moment. God could have dealt with them a long time ago, but God has allowed us to have this moment for our hearts, for our victory, for our moment. And God will bring you to places in your life that he could have dealt with a long time ago. God is perfectly capable of taking care of every problem in the world without you. But he lets you walk into that situation to learn to battle, to learn more of who God is, to see more of God's faithfulness in and through you. He says their protection, it's now gone. It's time to step up and go take this victory. It'll be scary, but we'll be victorious. He says lastly, the Lord is with us. Ask yourself, in a time of trouble or a time of controversy, is God on my side? Am I on God's side? If you're on the wrong side of that question, then simply switch sides, right? Say, you know what, I was wrong about that. I need to change some things, because otherwise you're going to lose. But it's a simple question. What's in my heart? Does it line up with God's word? If the answer is yes, if you're on the right side of that answer, then be encouraged. Say, hey, I'm going to devour that situation. Their protection is gone. God is with me. I'm not going to fear, and I'm not going to go back. Be pleasing to God. That's the truth. Don't live in rebellion. That's the truth. Don't live in fear. That's the truth. Heroes, we speak hope. The land ahead is great. Whenever you're in a situation with someone, say, hey, God has good things for you. God has a bright future for you. Hang in there. The land is great, but we need to be pleasing to God. We can't be living in rebellion, and we can't let fear take over. And then lastly, heroes need to stand in God's strength. Verse 10 of chapter 14, the whole assembly talked about stoning them. How many was the whole assembly? A couple million? I don't know how many actually picked up stones. I don't know. They say about 4 million were there. How many were they stoning them? Joshua, Moses, Aaron, Caleb. About 4 million against 4 here. So I know not all of them were picking up stones, but the point is they were vastly outnumbered, weren't they? Greatly outnumbered. And I tell you today, don't worry about the odds. Bet on God. Just bet. If I'm in line with God's word, he's going to take care of it. How many stones were being picked up against them, and they couldn't overwhelm them on their own? They needed to stand in God's strength. They needed God's glory. The task was too great. The people against them were too many. They needed God to move. And I tell you this morning, that's not a bad place to be. To be in a position where you say, God, I have no chance. I need you to move. God, I need you to do something. God, I need to see your glory, rather than being in the point where we say, you know what, I think I can do this. I think I have enough strength on my own to do this. That's why the Bible says, in your weakness you are strong. Because that's when you rely on God, and God is faithful 100 times out of 100. Exodus 33:15, Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, then don't send us from here. I need your presence. I need your glory. I need your strength. God's glory and God's power, where did it come from? In our text here today, where did his glory shine from that stopped everybody in their tracks? Where did it come from? It came from that tent of meeting. We see it in our verse 10. The Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to the whole assembly of Israel. At the tent of meeting. Where do you go to meet with God? Are you meeting with God? If we're heroes, we need the glory of God. We need the strength of God. And the glory of God shines from the place where we meet with him in private. That was the place Moses would go to seek the face of God. The place Moses would go to pray constantly. And when he needed it the most, the glory came from that place. Isaiah 40:31, those who hope in the Lord renew their strength. They soar on wings like eagles. They run, they don't grow weary. They walk, they will not faint. Psalm 46:9, he makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and the spear in two. He burns the chariots with fire. It's all about the glory, the strength of God. Psalm 46:10, he says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted among the earth. In short, the most important thing, heroes are people who meet with God. Moses met with God in that tent every day. And when he needed the strength, when he needed the glory, it came from that place. Moses met with God by the burning bush. The voice of the Lord came to Moses and said, "Take off your sandals. This place is holy ground." Well, where is that place? It's a random place in the desert. There's nothing important about the ground at all. The only thing that's important about it is that God is there. And if we want to be heroes, we need to have that place and that time where we daily meet with God. And when everything's fallen down, that's where his glory comes from. Let us stand together. If we could have the worship team come forward, we'll go ahead and begin to close. Take a moment and ask, do I have any of those attributes that the grasshoppers have? Am I quick to give up in the face of something that's intimidating? Do I tend to grumble and have a gloomy perspective? Am I having a grudge or placing blame on others because I have some insecurities of my own? Am I always wanting to go back to the way things used to be? Because God has great things ahead. If you'd say yes to any of those things, clear that up with the Lord right now. As we sing, come forward to the altar, say, "Lord, forgive me of this attitude. God, fill me with your glory. God, fill me with your perspective." And then as heroes, let us say, "God, help me stay humble in prayer. Help me to speak the hope. Be filled with hope. Be filled with truth. And God, help me to stand in your strength." We need to meet with God daily, don't we? Because that's where his glory comes from. That's where his strength comes from. It comes from the place where we meet with him. So respond as it's on your heart. Let's just close with a time